longing for you. But though I'm tired, I'll wait forever.
So tired, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to LNC Radio 113.8. That was Russ Morgan. As I said just before the song break, Russ Morgan's songs are actually in The Caretaker's track that he did. In fact, The Caretaker, as visionary as he was, or is, in regard to creating an auditory experience of dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or whatever it quite is, didn't actually make, I don't think, any of those songs. I could be wrong, but for example, the song that I first discovered Russ Morgan by in the Caretaker's album, I think it was Stage 1, was called Libe's Delay, and Libe was a famous psychologist. You can look into him. But the song is actually called Goodnight My Beautiful, which is a brilliant song. I actually sent it to a girl one time when I was saying goodnight to her. She was like, "Oh, you're so romantic." And I am romantic, so, send me some flowers. But the, yeah, it's called Goodnight My Beautiful, and every time I search for Goodnight My Beautiful, if I search for a piano cover or some sort of just any kind of cover really, people now have the habit of doing slash Libe's Delay, or even putting Libe's Delay first and then doing slash Goodnight My Beautiful. The Caretaker did not make that song. He took the song, and what he did was, with all these songs, is he edited in distortion and static and a few other effects, I'd assume, but the main ones are really distortion and static, and put them in a playlist or an album whereby it became more static, or well, it became more staticky and more distorted as time goes on, to display the effects of what these degenerative mental diseases can do to one's cognition, which was honestly like a visionary art project in itself. But I don't like the fact that now, in reference to the actual songs which have existed for nearly 100 years, we call them by names that he called them. Well, and especially if the cover you're doing does not include those bits of static and distortion. I mean, it seems, I don't know, it seems unfair. I don't like it. I mean, respect to Russ Morgan. He's done quite a lot. So tired, as you've heard, and I definitely suggest go and listen to Goodnight My Beautiful just as it is, not Libe's Delay, just Goodnight My Beautiful as it is. The piano cover, sorry, the piano intro is beautiful. That first like 5 seconds where it's just the piano playing and some strings or some drums in the background and just playing some chords. There's a couple of sixes in there and some sevenths and some ninths or whatever, probably, I'd assume. I don't know. But it's a beautiful intro, and that got me into it. And it's one of the few ones that doesn't have any words. Um, like I went down a bit of a rabbit hole. I mean, you have artists like Hal Kemp, um, Ray Noble and his orchestra. I mean, there are a lot of these kind of orchestras with a leading guy at the top. Al Bowley, Al Bowley. We're definitely going to have some Al Bowley coming up. I'll say that much, because that guy is he's a genius. Um, I wanted to talk about this video I watched the other day by Jonathan Pajot, probably my favourite Quebecois, I must say. Um, Talking about the idea of the apple in the Garden of Eden. And I always thought that God worked 6 days, not 5 days, and not 4 days like these woke liberals are telling you to work. God worked 6 days and then only rested one. And no wonder he was pissed off about the apple situation. I mean, there are a few differing ideas on the apple. What Peugeot was talking about was the hymns on paradise by St. Ephrem the Syriac, which I assume means he's from Syria. I know I'm a real scholar, but and I wanted to talk about how that does differ from the Gnostic viewpoint, and we were talking about Gnosticism last section, the section before. I want to talk about how the Gnostics have traditionally characterized the Eden story, the fall, as one of humanity's quests, a noble quest that is, for forbidden knowledge, prohibited to us by the demiurge. So Gnostics believe in this. They believe in the one that is God, the supreme above all, who cannot be named, really. He can be given general descriptors that tend to include all or infinite or these kind of things, eternal, which in some way are not descriptors at all because you can't visualize an infinity. But that only speaks to the majesty of what it is they are trying to describe. But the point is, they believe in that God, but they do not believe Yahweh of the Old Testament, and indeed, potentially Allah of the Quran, is said same God. So their cosmogony is something fairly different. They have this one God who has emanations arising from it. Other gods, which take on traits such as, say, wisdom or meaning or life or immortality. They take on these traits which we humans kind of can perceive, and they are the primary essence. I'm actually reading the Hermetica at the moment, and in a similar way they would call them the Usiarches, which is sort of the heads of a class, the heads of essence, the sort of the leader of this specific ideal. And a lot of these sort of 2,000-year-old philosophies take a lot of inspiration from Plato's World of Forms and the idea of Platonic ideals. But they conceptualize this one supreme God who creates emanations of other lesser gods who are also immortal and but represent specific things. And then at a certain point, Sophia, wisdom, wanted to either made a mistake or acted against the supreme God's will. She accidentally created a child or children who were foolish in some way or evil in some way. And one of these is called Yaldabaoth, aka the Demiurge. So what they think is that the Demiurge created the physical world in which humans inhabit as an imitation of the pleroma, which is the spiritual world in which the gods occupy. And indeed, it's somewhat analogous to Plato's cave, in that our world is the shadows on the wall, and their world is the fire, or the sun, and the world outside of that cave. Our world are the shadows. They're representations, they're imitations, but it's not the real thing. And trying to establish truth from that mere representation will never suffice to the actual majesty of what's outside, and what's outside the cave, or what's outside this world, which is the pleroma and the dominion of these gods and the big G god. So the demiurge creates people to worship him, to revere him, because he's jealous and he's vain, he's envious, he's insecure, you might say, and so he creates these beings who can worship him. And it's unclear whether the demiurge knows that there is even a realm beyond him, or whether he is deliberately doing it as out of jealousy or spite, or whether he's merely incompetent and foolish enough to think that he is the majesty of all. He is the highest being. It's certainly possible. But so he creates this garden, and he puts the humans in there, the Garden of Eden, and he says to them, "You can eat any tree in this garden except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil." And so this is where the different interpretations come from, and I can think of at least three. One of them is the kind of the new Graham Hancockian explanation, or which is that the apple represents some kind of. It's not just Graham Hancock. It's John Marco Allegro. It's Murescu. It's Joe Rogan. It's all these people who kind of believe that the apple was actually a mushroom, symbolic of psychedelic mushrooms which impart knowledge upon you. And obviously this does have some correlations with the second viewpoint, which is the Gnostic viewpoint, which is that this demiurge deliberately does not want us to eat of the apple, because then we will know our true natures, and we will know his true nature, and we will know how to act right and how to act wrong. And it has always confused me ever since I heard that Gnostic criticism of why God didn't want us to eat of that fruit. If we are his children, if he loved us, then surely we should be able to eat the fruit and understand his majesty in a more, or just more, just understand his majesty more. So the Gnostic theology is that this evil entity keeps us from truth and knowledge and goodness. So that makes sense in itself. But then going all the way back to the Peugeot video I just mentioned, he talks about the Hymns on Paradise by St. Ephrem the Syriac, which casts a very different story. The idea being that, and this is an extra biblical work, it's not actually, and this is one of the criticisms, it's not actually in any canonized Bibles. This is more of an examination in the same way that, Dante is an examination, or Paradise Lost is. So, where was I? St. Ephrem the Syriac. His idea was that we would have been given the apple, but that it was a test and we failed the test. In a similar way to not telling your kids how to drive until they're 17 or whatever, or keeping the knowledge of, sex away from them until they're a certain age, or keeping the knowledge of alcohol and drugs away from them from a certain age, or keeping politics out of their lives until a certain age. It's an idea that, or not letting them, stay in the house by themselves until they're a certain age. The idea being that you're a child, you're not responsible. I can give you the knowledge, and you might be able to take the knowledge in, but you might not be wise enough to understand it. You're smart enough to know it, you might not be wise enough to understand it. So when God sent the serpent, the Gnostics believe that the serpent was actually Jesus, or some other sort of symbol or signal from above to persuade humanity to do the right thing and get themselves knowledge so that they can be one with the one God again. Atonement, at-one-ment. What he suggests is that actually the tree is more of a stand-in. The tree actually might not represent, it might not be the tree of good and evil, the knowledge thereof. It's just a tree. And the serpent is no satanic entity, nor is it an entity from above in the pleroma, nor is it Jesus, nor is it just an independent actor. The serpent is specifically created to God, by God rather, to test his creation, and the serpent has no value beyond this test, and the apple and the tree itself have no value beyond this test. The idea being that they're representational, and that you give humanity a test, whether Adam and Eve, and the results of it's their decisions which are being measured, not the results. The results are, oh, they absorbed knowledge and they knew shame and stuff. And that's not the point. The point is the decision itself, and by making the decision to do the exact one thing that God said do not do, they proved themselves immature, and therefore God could not let them eat of the tree of life as well, which apparently is meant to be even better, so I don't know why he didn't ban that one as well. If it was me, I would have gone straight for the tree of life and then maybe eaten from the tree of knowledge, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't actually specifically ban eating from the tree of life. But so we're these immature beings who've been given a test, and we failed the test, and therefore we can't be in the garden anymore. And we have to go through this long process of living these many lives. Well, this is me. This is me now, not St. Ephraim. But we go through this process in the real world, not the Garden of Eden, not this sort of tutorial area, not this like Fortnite lobby area. We're in the real world where we now have to fight and kill and eat and fuck and just live in order to learn and in order to be finally ready to receive that. But the idea that St. Ephraim says is that if we had listened to God, if we had not been foolish and considered ourselves wise when we knew ourselves not to be, considered ourselves to be the masters of our destiny when God created us, God put us there, God told us what to do and what not to do, it's funny. I mean, I thought actually to myself while I was hearing this, maybe the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is just that. But they ate the evil apple and not the good apple. I'm not sure if anyone's ever seen a religious doctrine or analysis like that. That's a personal theory I'll put out there. It might be that this tree does have apples that possess knowledge of good and evil. It might not be that every apple possesses the knowledge of good and evil. Maybe some apples are good, some are bad. Who knows? Who knows? But it's interesting seeing the parallels between Gnosticism and Hermeticism, because similarly, the Hermeticists believe in this one God, this one supreme God, as I'd say the Hindus do, and potentially the Abrahamic religions, although I can't be sure, who has sort of these sub-gods between, like, gods who are not gods who represent these sort of platonic ideals of life or of justice or whatever, but they're not all powerful, and in some way similar to what the Muslims believe about the jinn and the angels, who, although immortal, they do not have the same agency as humans. Well, I suppose jinn do. Jinn do have free will, but let's take it to angels. These hermetic small g gods are somewhat analogous to angels in that, okay, yes, they're immortal, yes, they have powers, but they only have powers and immortality granted to them by the God that created them, and outside of that God they have no existence, no free will, no decision making, no personality. And so as humans, we're in this world where we're of two forms. We're twofold. It says in Copenhagen's translation, we're twofold. We have these earthly bodies, and we have these divine souls put into us. And actually, it says in the Asclepius, one the probably one of the major, if not the major, the most major Hermetic work. It says that because of our dual nature, we can actually be greater than those small g gods, who know nothing except what they've been taught and what they've been told. And it's very similar to what it says in the Quran, where God says to the angels, "You do not know what I know." And then he asks Adam to tell the names of all the things or whatever. I was never really sure what the names are in that verse, but he tells them to bow down to Adam, and Satan says no. It's an interesting one because if you go back and read the Old Testament, there's no mention of a Satan, of a great evil. But you then read the Bible and you read the Quran, and there is this idea of this great evil. But anyway, that's a topic for another time. Going back to the Hermetica are so fascinating. Um, for one, I mean, in the Asclepius, which is the most recent one that I read, and the end of the book I have, other than the 5 billion pages of notes, they prophesy Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes prophesizes the rise, basically, of atheism, and he does it in this kind of prophecy about Egypt, and how Egypt used to represent, in a similar way to what we were talking about with the cave just now. Egypt represents this image of heaven. It's where the gods came down and forged the reality that we kind of, you look at the pyramids, you look at the Sphinx, you look at the temples, and you look at their astrological knowledge and their religious knowledge. This is like a map, almost like a physical map of a symbolic world, but nevertheless a map, even if imperfect. And over time, we've gone away from that, and the gods have left Egypt, and the tales thereof will be told by the children, but not understood. And people will cease to look into the sky with wonderment and with awe, and cease to recognize the divine, and I use that word deliberately, divine, the divine majesty which has begotten them all. And indeed, it is the case. I would say that it's kind of it's very similar to the idea in the book of Ezekiel, that of God leaving the temple. The Jews, not for the last time and not for the first time by a long stretch, have disobeyed God again, and God says, "Oh, well, all right, you do what you're going to do. You're not going to have my support any longer. Bye." And so he leaves the temple. And you can't blame him for leaving the temple if you read the Bible, to be honest. You cannot blame him. He's really done everything he can, in my opinion. Apart from, like, literally just showing himself to everyone. But then what's the point of the test? What's the point of this spiritual test if he just shows himself to everyone? But it's also very similar to the idea of Nietzsche's, which is, the idea that God is dead and there is not enough water in the world to wash out all the blood. And so you have this prophecy in the Hermetica 2,000 years ago, which is saying about how the spiritual beliefs, the awe of the majesty of the universe will come to an end, and the idea of gods, of which they talk about how we create our own gods as well as there being other real gods, but we create our own gods, which then, whatever, through some collective manifestation, I suppose, this doesn't say it in there, but have some level of reality to them as well. Once they've left, once God is dead, humanity's in for a rough ride, folks. But we still have these ancient books. We still have these ancient philosophies and these ancient teachings, and I would encourage everyone who's interested in nearly anything to read some of these ancient texts. And I won't say which ones are better than the other ones. It's deeply personal. It's going to be deeply affected by the beliefs you already have, the preconceptions you already have, the moral systems you already have, and the emotions that arise when you read them. So for some, the Old Testament might be the most captivating. For some, it might be the Quran. For some, it might be the Gnostic Gospels, the New Testament, or the Hermetica, or the Bhagavad Gita. It might be the I Ching. It might be reading myths of old, the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Sumerians. That might be where it is for you. I would say read, 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 and then try to understand. Know that you will not, but try anyway, and that's a noble pursuit. And if you get to 20% understanding, it's better than 0%. If you get to 80%, it's better than 0%. Don't expect to get to 100%. It's probably impossible. A lot of these books are, if not all of them actually, now that I think about it, all the ones I just mentioned, are not written in English, and they're certainly not written in modern English. They're written in ancient tongues, which in some cases are not even spoken anymore, and have been translated numerous times. For the most part, at least. Even the ones that haven't, say the Quran, which Muslims love to tell us has never been changed or whatever. As someone who doesn't speak or read Arabic, I can only read the translation in English, so you have to be aware that some of the concepts might not be immediately understandable. That's fine. But I was telling a friend the other day about my experience reading the Bible, and I've realized that if you can read it in so many ways. You can read it in so many ways. If you like history, if you like psychology, if you like sociology, if you like politics, if you like fantasy, if you like Lord of the Rings or 40K or Star Wars or Game of Thrones, Dune, if you like Dune, 100% you're gonna enjoy these books. And again, you can read them in a historical way, you can read them in a psychological way, you can read them in a sociological way, you can read them in the other way I mentioned, or you can read them in a fantasy way. And they're all equally valid, and you can do all of them simultaneously. Or you can do all of them specifically and really hone in on that one thing. It's completely up to you, but these books have so much scope and so much understanding and knowledge in them, and so much to ponder and to make your own mind up about. Maybe more than any other book, or any other books that have been written. Religious books have so many angles to explore and so many angles to think about that I think if you like reading in general, if you do like reading, then I would suggest giving these a read. I said just now that humanity's in for a rough ride, but sometimes Sunday morning is just the nicest thing. So we've got Easy today by the Commodores. You're listening to LNC Radio 113.8 FM.